When I asked my husband why the basement smelled like lavender, he smiled as if he hadn't heard the question. Arthur continued to slice his steak into perfect cubes with surgical precision, and only a tiny, barely visible vein pulsing at his temple betrayed the tension that instantly transferred to me. Our kitchen, usually as sterile and cold as an operating room, typically smelled only of expensive coffee and lemon floor cleaner, but today that intrusive, cloyingly sweet floral scent seeped through the cracks of the closed basement door. It filled the entire space, settling as a bitter taste on my tongue and triggering a sudden wave of inexplicable nausea. Arthur finally raised his eyes to mine, clear blue and empty as a winter sky, and spoke softly, with the same condescending tone one uses to soothe petulant children or the mentally ill. He told me I was likely imagining things, that I'd been working too hard lately and hadn't been getting enough fresh air. But I knew that smell. It was the scent of the sachets my grandmother used to stuff in linen closets to ward off moths. It meant only one thing: old things people were trying to preserve, or rot they were trying to hide. I lowered my fork, feeling my appetite replaced by a clammy dread that gripped my stomach with cold fingers. In our 3-year marriage, there was an unspoken rule: the basement was Arthur's territory, his den, a workshop where he built his architectural models. I was strictly forbidden from entering for my own safety, because of the sharp tools and toxic glues. I had always accepted this condition, viewing it as a quirky trait of a creative mind, but today the scent of lavender shattered that fragile illusion of normalcy. Lavender isn't glue, solvent, or wood shavings, it's the smell of comfort, and it had absolutely no place in a windowless concrete bunker. I watched my husband put another piece of meat into his mouth, and I was struck by how robotic his movements were: chew, swallow, dab lips with napkin. No wasted emotion, not a shadow of concern, as if he were programmed to ignore any reality that didn't fit his script. In that moment, I realized for the first time that I didn't know the person sleeping in my bed, and that thought was more terrifying than any smell. That night, when Arthur fell asleep and his breathing grew even and deep, I lay with my eyes wide open, listening to the silence of the massive house we had bought 6 months ago with the money from the sale of my parents' apartment. Rustles sounded like footsteps, creaking floorboards like whispers, and the smell of lavender seemed to ooze through the vents into the bedroom, suffocating me. Carefully, trying not to wake him, I slipped out from under the covers and walked barefoot to the kitchen, guided not by logic but by an animal instinct demanding I check the perimeter. The basement door was locked with a heavy deadbolt. Arthur always kept the key on a ring in his pocket, but I noticed a thin strip of light under the door. It was faint and trembling, as if a candle were burning down there, or an old monitor was flickering. I pressed my ear against the cold wood and froze. Not a sound came from below, yet the silence itself felt unnatural, dense, palpable. Suddenly, the light went out, and I recoiled, barely stifling a scream. Someone was down there in the dark, or worse, Arthur had installed motion sensors, and now he knew I was there. The next 2 days turned into an exquisite form of torture, a game of chess played blindfolded, filled with suspicions and things left unsaid. Arthur behaved perfectly. He brought me tea in bed, asked about my translation work, and cracked jokes, but a new, steely note had appeared in his gaze. It was as if he were evaluating me, weighing my reactions on the scales of his paranoia. The lavender smell vanished, replaced by the sharp stench of bleach that practically seared the inside of my nose the moment I approached the stairs. When I timidly mentioned it smelled like a swimming pool, Arthur snapped irritably that a pipe had burst. He claimed he'd had to call emergency maintenance while I was at the store, and now everything was soaked in mold disinfectant. The lie was so smooth, so well rehearsed, that I almost believed it, were it not for one detail: I work from home, and I hadn't gone to the store at the time he mentioned. He had miscalculated, mixed up his days, and that tiny crack in his perfect legend became a siren wailing that my husband wasn't just lying, he was constructing an alternative reality for me. On Thursday, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, descended upon us without warning. She was a woman with ice-cold eyes and the demeanor of a retired general, who had always treated me like a temporary misunderstanding in her genius son's life. She sat in the living room, lips pursed, drinking tea without taking off her coat, as if afraid of catching something plebeian from our furniture. The conversation was halting until she suddenly sniffed the air and grimaced, remarking that the house smelled of dampness and cheap chemicals. Unable to help myself, I mentioned the accident in the basement. Eleanor froze with her cup halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting to Arthur, who had just entered the room. In that look, I didn't see surprise, but fear, genuine, primal fear. Again, slipped out before she could bite her tongue. The word hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Arthur laughed loudly, cutting her off, and launched into some ridiculous story about old plumbing, but I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the back of the armchair. The word again implied a system, a repetition, a script that had been played out before, perhaps with another woman, in another house, and the finale of that script clearly didn't involve a happily ever after. That evening, when Arthur left for a meeting with a client, I decided to do something that a week ago would have felt like betrayal. I started a search. I didn't break down the basement door, that would have been too obvious and stupid. Instead, I went to his office, his sanctum sanctorum, where perfect order reigned. I rifled through papers, bills, and blueprints, but everything was sterile until I stumbled upon an old ledger hidden behind a row of architectural history books. It wasn't a work planner, but an expense diary where figures were listed in columns without explanation. The dates, however, matched the milestones of our life together with frightening precision: our wedding day, the day we bought the house, the day my life insurance was finalized. Next to the last date stood a 7-figure sum and a pencil note: asset liquidation, November. I looked at the calendar. November began in 4 days. The ground slipped out from under me, the office walls began to close in, and I realized I wasn't a wife or a beloved woman. I was a business project approaching its expiration date. I was hit by a wave of memories that had once seemed romantic but now looked like links in a chain: his insistence on putting the house in both our names, even though I paid for it, his persuasion to insure my life for the maximum amount, for our future, his strange questions about whether I could swim or if I was afraid of heights. I remembered his first wife, whom he mentioned only in passing, a tragic accident in the mountains. Back then, I pitied him, admiring his resilience. Now, I saw the cold calculation of a predator who changed victims like gloves, leaving behind only insurance payouts and the scent of lavender. Lavender. It hit me: lavender masks the smell of decomposition, but it also soothes, lulling vigilance to sleep. Was he already poisoning me? I rushed to the bathroom and dumped out the contents of the medicine cabinet. The vitamins he so solicitously made me take every morning looked normal, but now every capsule looked like a bullet. I should have run. I should have grabbed my documents and the cat, jumped in the car, and driven to the border. But something stopped me, a cold fury waking up deep inside, in the place where love and trust used to live. If I ran, he would find me, or he would find another, the next fool with an inheritance and stars in her eyes. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't become just another tragic accident on his impeccable widower's resume. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and forced my hands to stop shaking. I needed a plan. I needed evidence, ironclad, irrefutable proof that would send him behind bars for the rest of his life. And the key to that evidence lay in the basement, behind a door smelling of bleach and death. I remembered Arthur's habit of hiding spare keys in the garage, in an old paint can he'd treated as a stash spot since the day we moved in. I found the can in the garage almost immediately. It sat on the top shelf, covered in dust, but the lid was clean, as if recently touched. Inside, amidst rusty nails, lay a small silver key. My heart hammered against my ribs as I returned to the house. I approached the basement door and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, like a knife through butter, and the bolt clicked, opening the way into the hell of my marriage. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began to descend the steep wooden steps, feeling the air grow colder and heavier with each stride. The smell of bleach was overpowering here, but cutting through it was that same sickly sweet note of lavender. Now, I understood why. The basement wasn't a workshop. It was a warehouse. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, each neatly labeled Elena, Marina, Sophia. Women's names. I opened the nearest box marked Elena. Inside lay dresses that had gone out of style 10 years ago, a stack of letters tied with a wreath. I stood amidst this graveyard of hopes, feeling my horror shift into an icy calm. He didn't just kill us, he erased us, appropriating our lives and turning living people into cardboard boxes of junk. Suddenly, I heard the front door open upstairs. Arthur was back early. I heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway, then a sound that froze my blood. He wasn't heading to the kitchen or the bedroom, but straight to the basement door. He knew. Maybe there was an alarm on the door, or maybe he just sensed an intruder in his lair like a predator. I had seconds. There was nowhere to run, the only exit led straight into his arms. I killed the flashlight and squeezed into the darkest niche between the shelves, behind Marina's boxes, praying to every god that he wouldn't spot me in the dark. The door creaked open, and a beam from a powerful flashlight sliced through the basement darkness. Arthur descended slowly, savoring the moment, whistling a cheerful tune that made the situation absolutely surreal. "Dina, honey," his voice sounded affectionate, but the echo twisted it into a growl. "I know you're here. No need to hide. We're adults, let's discuss this like civilized people." The beam of light danced across the shelves, picking out the names of dead women from the gloom. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop a scream, feeling tears stream down my cheeks. He walked to the table and ran his hand over the box with my name. "A pity," he sighed. "I really like you. You were the smartest of them all. But curiosity. It's such a vice, darling." He turned in my direction, and I realized he knew exactly where I was. He was playing with me like a cat with a half-dead mouse, stretching out the pleasure before the final strike. "Come on out, Dina," he said, his voice harder now, and something metallic glinted in his hand. "Don't make me drag you out by force. It would be unaesthetic." I knew this was the end. But in that moment, my eyes fell on a shelf next to me where canisters of liquid stood. The label read "solvent." And in my pocket was the lighter I had mechanically swiped from his desk along with the diary. The plan formed instantly: insane, suicidal, but the only one possible. I wasn't going to die submissively like a sheep in a slaughterhouse. "You bitch," he screamed, and that cry shattered his image of the refined architect, exposing the beast underneath. I flicked the lighter. The fire flared instantly, greedily licking at the spilled solvent, and a wall of flame separated us. I seized his moment of confusion and bolted for the stairs, leaping over steps, choking on smoke and adrenaline. Arthur tried to pull. Outside, a cold, sobering autumn rain was falling. I got into the car, police, firefighters, ambulances, everything blurred into a kaleidoscope of flashing lights and anxious voices. I was questioned, wrapped in a blanket, given sedatives. They pulled Arthur out. He was alive, but severely burned and suffering from smoke inhalation. As they wheeled him on a gurney toward the ambulance, he suddenly opened his eyes and found me in the crowd. There was no superiority or threat in that look anymore, only animal terror and the realization of his ruin. He tried to say something, but the oxygen mask stopped him. A detective, a young guy with a tired face, walked up to me and spoke quietly. We found strange things in the basement. No bodies, but a lot of boxes. We're going to need to speak with you in detail, Mrs. Collins. I nodded, clutching the diary in my pocket. I'll tell you everything, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I'll tell you about every single box. The trial lasted 6 months. The diary became the key piece of evidence, exposing a scheme of serial fraud and murder disguised as accidents. It turned out that Elena and Marina really had died under strange circumstances, and their assets had transferred to Arthur. The investigation exhumed the bodies and found traces of poisons that were undetectable in a standard autopsy. Arthur, also known as Thomas, also known as David, he had multiple passports, received a life sentence. His mother, Eleanor, was charged as an accomplice. She had helped him fence the items and launder the money. I learned I was fifth on his list. The fifth box. 8 months later, I am sitting on the terrace of a small cafe in a different city. I sold the house, sold everything that tied me to that life, and moved somewhere where no one knows my name. I took back my maiden name, changed my hair, and started writing a book. A latte and a small vase of flowers sit before me. The waiter brings the check and asks with a smile, "Did you enjoy everything? By the way, we have a new lavender dessert, would you like to try it?" I flinch, but then force myself to smile back. "No, thank you," I say, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm allergic to lavender." Deadly. I step out onto the street, breathing in the fresh air that smells of rain and exhaust fumes. I am alive. I am free. And I will never ever let anyone lock me in a box again. I walk down the street, dissolving into the crowd, one of millions, but now I know the value of my life. And that value isn't a number on an insurance policy, but the right to choose what my home smells like. And it definitely won't smell like lavender.